Aine Lawlor here, filling in for Marian. Welcome back. Now, most of us at some stage in our lives wonder whether we have a book inside us. In the next couple of minutes, I'm joined by three prestigious and multi-award winning authors who are going to tell you how to turn that dream into reality. Instead of sitting around thinking about a book or thinking about writing, how you actually go about doing it. Now, John Boyne, you'll know for The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas. He's written 7 novels for adults, 3 for children. He's got more awards than I can list off here. And your new book, This House is Haunted, John, that's coming out in April.
The end of April, that's right.
Okay. Carlo Gebler, again, a long list of novels, short stories, children's books, awards, non-fiction drama. Your new book, Confessions of a Catastrophist, that's out when, Carlo?
February.
Very good. And on the line from Manchester, MJ Hyland is the author of 3 multi-award-winning novels, How the Light Gets In, Carry Me Down and This Is House. So you all know how to write books. And all of you, I think, are involved in teaching in some way or other. Is that right?
Well, we have been. I have taught in the past, and I was a student on the creative writing course at the University of East Anglia when I was starting out in my early 20s, and I've taught there since.
And Carlo, you work in prison, is that?
Yeah, at the moment I teach in Her Majesty's Prison Maghaberry, and in a week's time I start teaching on the MPhil at Trinity, the MPhil in creative writing.
Very good. And Maria Hyland, you're teaching in Manchester as well.
Yeah, I'm one of those strange writers. I have a weird habit of doing a lot of teaching. I really enjoy teaching, and I'm at a lecturer at the University of Manchester Creative Writing Programme, and I also teach for the Guardian Fiction Masterclass Programme. So lots of teaching.
That is a lot to teach. And that's, I mean, can you teach someone to write?
Yes, I mean, think of it as an analogous with sort of art school or music school. With sufficient starting talent, you can speed up somebody's apprenticeship, so you can make them better, faster, and you can certainly help somebody become a very good writer in the space of a year or 2, when it might have taken them, if they're all alone, locked in a vacuum and isolated without any support or feedback, it might have taken them 5 or 6 years. So you can certainly, but we need to have starting a certain amount of talent to start with.
And Carlo, I suppose particularly, when you're dealing with the prison population, are you talking about writing as therapy? Because that's, I suppose, what motivates an awful lot of people. Or is it about writing something, that's a big book, that's a proper work of fiction?
I mean, all writing is therapy. All the writing, I would regard my own writing as therapy. It makes me feel better creating order, telling a story, sequencing words, and using words in an interesting and engaging way. If you think only in terms of commercial success, and you want to be a writer, then you're making a terrible mistake.
So stop thinking about the agent and start thinking about the words?
Absolutely. Start thinking about the story and start thinking about the reader. Writing and reading is a very intimate transaction. I have a picture in my head. I turn it into squiggles down on the page. It's then reloaded into the reader's brain, and they then see the picture that was in my head, in their head, on their cinema screen. A beautiful, intimate process, and you want it to be as fluent and smooth and marvellous as possible. And what learning to be a writer involves is understanding how to make that transaction work smoothly.
And so yes, and I don't think that you should ever start with the proposition that I want to be a writer, as in I want to be famous and to be known and to be a household name, and I want to make loads of bucks. You've got to love the act of writing, because it's tricky, and it's especially tricky in the beginning when you're making more mistakes, when you're making the lion's share of your mistakes. But the more you do it, the more discipline you acquire, the more steady your pace becomes, the better
Practice
you become.
makes perfect.
You must be addicted to it. You must love the act of writing and not the idea of being a writer.
Because, John, a lot of people have this image of being a writer. You might get up, have a cup of coffee, write a couple of words, walk on the beach, maybe have lunch with your agent, plan a little trip to a literary festival. We imagine it's a very nice, kind of civilised lifestyle. What's the reality like?
Well, it can be a civilised lifestyle, but it's a lifestyle that you need to be very disciplined about. I mean, when you work for yourself, which I do, you cannot give yourself the luxury of getting up in the morning and saying, will I bother going to work or not? You go downstairs, turn on the computer, you start writing. You don't wait for... I don't wait for inspiration to strike. I don't think that's how novels get written. Novels get written by writing a little bit of it every single day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. I remember years ago reading...
Every single day?
Every day, including Christmas Day. That's how... I remember years ago reading an interview with Maeve Binchy, and Maeve Binchy said that if you write a page every day, at the end of a year, you'll have 365 pages, which is longer than the average novel. And, in a way that sounds simple, but it's true.
Yeah.
You cannot wait for anything else. You have to say, this is what I'm doing. I want to write this story. I need to write this story. I have to get it out of me somehow. And you sit down and you just write it.
And Carl, you agree every single day?
I live in an old national school, and my study is a bicycle shed. Every morning I go out to the old National School cloakroom, I put on my overcoat, I walk across the playground, I go into the bicycle shed as if I'm going to work. I take off the coat, I put it on the hanger, and then I sit down and work. And like John, I work every day of the year if the
You don't
family
take
will allow
Christmas
me.
Day off,
No,
no?
always work. This year I did, but often I work on Christmas Day. And the other thing is I have no internet in my study. I can only write.
Maria, longhand or, writing by hand or on computer, does that make a difference?
Yeah, in the past I wrote by hand, but now, of course, I have a little bit of difficulty because I have MS. But I think anything that slows down the process, there's something about working on a word processor that can create the illusion that your work is more finished, more polished than it really is. And you use your favourite font and the perfect margins, and it all looks proper and completed. And all you do is pick at the words like a scab, constantly moving words around on the word processor. That's a very, very worse way to write. I think certainly if you can write by hand, your early drafts by hand, anything that slows the process down, you convert the words you've already put on the screen into an ugly font, print them up.
Use an ugly font.
You need to disturb, because the difficulty writers have, and we don't all have this gift as writers, some do, some don't, is the ability to read your own work objectively. So if you've made it look really pretty, you're screwed, because you're not really seeing what's on the page. You're seeing what you hope or imagines on the page. So you need to disrupt that. So you need an ugly font, or have someone read it aloud to you, or find your allies. Updike recently said in a speech at Yale that you need frank readers to tell you whether it's good or bad. And you need to disrupt that process of making the document look pristine and ready to go to the printers. Do you know what I mean?
And the rewriting, I presume you all agree that rewriting is the key. It's not just what you say you have a set target of words each day. How do you do the rewriting?
Well, I think one thing about rewriting is that when you write the first draft of a novel, you might set out thinking you know what it is you're writing, but you don't. Only when you finish that first draft do you realise this is actually what it was about. So you have to go back and write it and rewrite it and rewrite it. Anything, 10, 12, 15 times. It's the key to it. And
what do you do when you're rewriting? Are you putting things in or taking things out?
What I do is actually, because I do write the first draft on a computer, but then I print it out with massive spaces between all the lines, so maybe only 5 or 6 lines per page. And I put all my changes, I write by hand all the changes, and then I feed all that back in, print it out, do that over and over and over until I print out a draft that I don't have anything left to write on. So yeah, I mean, you're tidying up the language, you're realising that there's something happens later on that you didn't know in the first draft, so you've got to go back and foreshadow that in some way. You're changing it in any number of ways. It's instinctive. It's very hard to define, because you just know yourself as a writer. Here's the problems in this scene or in this chapter or this character, and I've got to find a way to fix that.
And are there moments when you're rewriting when you can kind of go, oh my God, I've made a total hames of this. The plot is, you started re-editing things and moving things around, and suddenly your plot starts nearly crumbling under your hands.
The way I think of it is, inside you have an image, which is the novel, and writing the novel consists of making a tracing of that image. And what you want to get to is the point where the tracing and the inner image are absolutely identical, but you have to keep making the tracing lines over and over and over again. 15, 20 drafts is really standard. The secret of writing is rewriting. And what happens when you go through your drafts as you go forward is you're looking for the things that trip you up, that snag you, the infelicities, the howlers, and you smooth and you smooth and you comb and you burnish, and eventually you are disgusted and exhausted, and then it's done.
When Flaubert was writing Madame Bovary, he said that he had bouts of nausea and he was on all fours on his floor.
Oh my God, that sounds painful.
Loathing himself. But I think that's, if you can't rewrite, if you can't fix your own work, then you're not a writer. I think it's most of a writer's life is rewriting, and you need to enjoy that part of the process. But when I was still learning to write, I read a lovely book, Stephen King's small, beautiful book. You can read it in an hour. It's called On Writing.
Brilliant.
It's a brilliant book, and it contains all of the very best advice you'll ever need. And he said that when he was being rejected early on in his career, one of the editors of a magazine told him to cut by a third. And he did that, and it changed everything. And that was about, getting rid of omitting needless words and all the fat and all the overwriting and the adjectives and the piles and piles of wasted words and so forth and so on. And it was about being more truthful, beginning with a subject and story rather than trying to affect a style, rather than trying to sound like a writer. And Updike similarly said that when I was listening to his lecture the other day. He said, don't try to begin with a style, like trying to sound like a writer. Begin with a subject and a story that you want to tell, and then your voice and style will come with practice and practice and practice.
And you believe in the simplest, shortest words, and the same with sentences, because a lot of people worry, well, if I keep it all, take all that fancy stuff out, well, what's left in terms of style?
Well, Mark Twain said, I never write Metropolis for 7 cents when I can write City and get paid the same. And Hemingway similarly talked about never using $10 words. I mean, I think that's truer now. You don't have to write as minimalistically as Carver or Cheever or Hemingway. Of course, you can write beautifully, like Hilary Mantel has shown. You can write really ornately and still achieve wonderful fictional works. However, most writers, especially in the early days of their apprenticeship, use too many fancy words to try and sound like a writer. And the simple is best. Simple and direct verbs and nouns. And Steinbeck was fantastic on this subject. He wrote a beautiful book, and he talked about verbs, the power of verbs and nouns. And I think when I write, I think in terms of scenes. Imagine if I'm a film director and I had to cast my film, what would my characters look like? What would the first scene look like? And I think when I write, it's just one scene after another, and I break it down into small parts because I'm not disciplined. I'm a lazy bastard. I hate work, which is why I gave up law to write. And I have found so many hundreds of tricks to break down the task into manageable, like psychologically speaking, to make it easier to get on with, because it's hard.
And John, is there a difference between writing for adults and writing for children? Are you conscious of that, a difference in style when you're writing?
I'm not, and I always the hardest question I ever get asked really is how do you write for children? Because I don't sit down thinking I certainly don't make the language simpler. I don't make the subject matters simpler. The 3 children's books I've written are as serious in subject as the adult novels I've written. The only real difference I see in doing it is that I have a child protagonist, and so I call those my books for young people. That's the only difference. But it's always surprising to me how many writers of adult fiction are intimidated by the prospect of writing a children's book. And I've asked many who say, God, no, I couldn't do it. I wouldn't know how. And I said, but you know how to write a novel. You know how to tell a story. Just tell a story with a child at the centre of it. And
I remember meeting an author once who said, if you're going to write fiction, write for children, because they're the books that get reprinted and they're the ones you make money out of. I don't know whether that's true.
I mean, as most writers are, I believe very much in getting children reading. As writers of adult novels, we want them to grow up and read books. There were too many, talking.
But there's a longer shelf life for children's books than there is for adult books. Is that true?
Well, I don't know if that's I don't know if that's why you should be writing. Thinking about that, you should just be thinking about writing the best book you can write. But there are not enough, in terms of tips on writing. What people need to do more than anything else is read. There are not enough people who are reading, and I've gone into.
And should you read just stuff you like, or read outside of your comfort zone?
Oh,
read whatever you get your hands on.
Outside. Yeah. So read books you don't normally read. Read authors you haven't read before.
Absolutely. And read lots of non-fiction too, because you need material. You need to know the world. You need to be smart. I don't mean in terms of IQ points. You need to know things. You need to put that stuff of the world in your books. And that you can. And Updike, I'm obsessed with Updike at the moment, as you can probably tell. He also
a good obsession.
He also admitted, and it's very rare for writers to admit 2 things: that they've written bad early drafts and they never show them to you, or how how they learnt to write. And Updike talked about transcribing, copying, imitating, emulating. And he named the two writers that he copied, and for years, Henry Green and Proust, to learn the craft. And I did that early on too, transcribed whole passages from Flannery O'Connor and Raymond Carver and the writers I love. I learnt to technique by looking closely at them, and it amazes me when people enroll in the MA program in creative writing and they hardly read at all. They say they don't have enough time. It'd be like going to music school and saying I don't listen to any. I don't
Carlo,
have Schubert, you know.
Yeah, you agree with that?
Yes, you have to adopt a sort of insouciant attitude to reading. Just get the book, go through it as quickly as possible and move on to the next. A book is not an Everest to climb. It's just a little thing that you just devour and throw away.
What about writing in the first person? Is that to be especially for somebody starting off? Is that something to be careful of?
If you write in the first person, you can get directly to the voice, but then you have all sorts of expositional problems. In other words, all the stuff that you have to know to get through the story has to be channeled through your narrator, I character. If you write in the third person, it's much easier because you can tell the reader things which the characters need not necessarily know.
Because when people go to writing courses, a lot of what the first advice, write what you know. So does that mean you write about yourself?
I don't think you should write what you know. I always think it's a really boring piece of advice.
Yeah,
I think you should write about what you don't know.
No, absolutely. Write what you don't know, because then you'll find out. But in terms of advice, the simplest counsel, the best, simplest counsel is write in the past and write in the third person. If you're starting. But it isn't, the trouble with writing is there are no rules. That's the only rule. So sometimes something can only be written in the first person. It won't work any other way. To go back to reading, the other thing about reading is that books offer solutions to narrative problems that you, as a writer, similarly face.
So you learn by example.
Absolutely.
I want to ask the other writers today whether you guys, do you underline and mark passages in books when you find solutions to problems you're facing, and then you keep a record of them, you know where they are, you go back to, that Graham Greene tackled a problem that you're now facing and you underlined it or you wrote some notes. Do you do that kind of thing?
I don't write on the book itself.
Really?
I can't. I just...
Really?
I'm like you. I would think about writing on a book. Yeah, I'd have a copy by my side and make notes.
I make notes on a file on my computer. But if you went into my library at home, it would look like none of the books have been read. It's like, I peep through because I don't want to crack the spines.
No, you're the one we want to borrow books from, Maria. You obviously write all over the books.
Mine are demolished. It's disgusting. I eat my dinner on them. I mean, they're really filthy. And they're underlined to death. I mean, they're so marked up and on comments in the margins and all. Yeah, it's crazy.
And what about plot? Do you, for instance, Carlo, do you need to know the end before you start? Is that a good idea? Know where you're going?
I would always counsel you write an end and put it in the drawer. I mean, writing is like writing a book. You're travelling across a tightrope. So you have your first paragraph, which attaches the tightrope at one end, and write your last paragraph, which attaches it at the end. Then you can stagger across the tightrope for the first time. By the time you get to the end of your book, this end that you've written at the beginning will be completely wrong. You'll never look at it, in fact. But it gives you something to go towards. And that is something to lure you on, and that's what you need. It's not knowing your end, it's just deceiving yourself, tricking yourself into believing that you have a concluding point. When you get there, it'll be something different, but that doesn't matter.
And John, do you work out your plots or do you just start writing?
Well, that has changed. I think when you're starting out first, I think it's very helpful to work out your whole plot so that when you sit down every day and okay, this is the scene I'm writing.
Like the Leaving Cert essay, work out the plan and then
when
write
you're starting, because if you're going to complete your first novel and what that will do for you as a writer to say that you actually got to the end, that's very important. So I think, yes, early on in a career, it's very helpful to do that. I think as time goes on and you grow more confident and you grow more experienced, I don't anymore. I start with just an idea and I know I will be able to solve the problems of the novel as I encounter them, and that's very exciting to me. I don't think it's sensible for a 20-year-old, to do that. I think it's much better to feel the triumph of writing the words "the end" and know that you've actually done that.
And then, Maria, there's the awful business of showing it to people and maybe they don't like it, and then you maybe dream of getting it published, but it starts coming. How do you go through that process?
Oh, it's awful. It's awful for every writer. And because, you know, even if you're quite critical, and I always have been, thank Christ, of my own work, when you send it off, you think it's good, or you wouldn't be sending it, and then you start getting rejections. But I think it's important, and I didn't start doing this until I was probably in my late 20s, asking editors of magazines to tell me why they think the thing sucked, why they didn't want it. And I asked directly for feedback, and that made a huge difference. And then I enrolled in some courses, and I studied a few creative writing courses, and got. But you need frank people. But you know, how you choose that person is a very difficult thing, because it can wreck friendships and relationships if someone's, you know.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody didn't like your book, it's a bit like them not liking your child. I'd imagine it would be a bit hard to be friends with them afterwards.
It's personal. It feels like, you know, it's you they're condemning. But, you know, you need a thick skin to be a writer. You really do. But you need to choose those people carefully. There need to be people who share your sensibility and taste in writing. I wouldn't give my work in draft form to somebody who loves Proust, for example.
Okay.
I'd give them someone who likes Carver, because I know they're, you know, like the way that I write like a child.
I think that if you are going to give something to a friend, family member, or a writer to read, you have to want their opinion. A lot of people, you know, in my experience...
So you want their opinion and not just that they say
you don't
it's
want
brilliant.
praise. If you want praise, give it to your mom. You know,
Okay.
if you give it to somebody, you should be asking them what's not working in this book, not what is. I've had too many experiences where people have given me something, and when I've given them a serious, honest answer, I can see that they get angry or frustrated because often they don't want your opinion. They want you to get them published. And I can't get somebody published. You know, I don't have that ability. Only the book itself can do that. If you're going to give something to somebody, don't ask for praise. Ask for what is not working in this book. Tell me all the things that are bad about it.
I remember when I came in here years and years and donkeys years ago, but a producer once said to me, always trust the people who criticise you to your face, because everyone else is doing it behind your back. So it's really, that's actually a thing to rely on and be grateful for, Carlo.
I mean, if you're going to give your book to somebody, or if you're going to be somebody who receives a book, the same applies, which is that criticism that is negative, stamping on tender green shoots, is a waste of time, of everybody's time. The only thing that you want to hear, or the only advice that you should give, is how to make something better. You know, the book is a car, it's not going very well, lift up the bonnet, terrible analogy, but you know where this is going, look at the engine, find out what's wrong and fix it. That's what the conversation should be.
And I used to ask people who had given a short story to 3 or more months after they'd read it, what do you remember about the story? And they couldn't remember a damn thing about it. I knew it had failed.
Yeah, because good fiction stays with you, actually. It kind of stays
Even
alive in your
image.
imagination.
Yeah.
Does it make a difference?
If you get somebody that you really trust, then that can be an ongoing thing, because I almost always give early draft to Claire Kilroy, who's a great friend of mine, and she'll sit down and say, okay,
you can kind of trust her writer's instincts.
Here's all the things. I gave one last year, the one that's coming out this year, and the first thing she said when we sat down, she said, it needs a lot of work. You know, and grand, okay, right.
To you, and I mean, you've scads of experience at this stage, and
yeah, but so
she's
does she,
a very, very, very astute reader,
and it's very helpful to have somebody say it needs a lot of work, and here's 10, 20 things that are not working at the moment.
So even at this stage of your career, sorry, Mary, but Maria, even at this stage of your career, you can't kind of rest on your laurels and kind of go, oh no, I'm a writer, so I know what I'm doing.
No, every book you're starting again.
Yeah, exactly. And no writer writes alone. It's collaborative. There is no single writer who's ever lived or died who didn't have someone but by them who was a good reader and helped them along.
Does it make a difference whether you're writing novels, poetry, short stories? I presume short stories are the easiest. People don't really write so much poetry anymore.
Short stories are incredibly difficult.
Are they?
Yeah. I think it's really hard to write a good short story.
You see, I'm a real hack. It's the number of words.
Once you've created the characters, you might as well stagger on for 60,000 words.
That's what I think.
Why use them all up in 5,000 words? It's pointless, but we do, because we're so generous. We're the gift that goes on giving.
You sound like Mark Twain there, the way
I was going to say that we haven't said very many encouraging things. I can imagine beginning writers listening to the show say, well, how do I start? I don't even know how to find the time to write or the discipline. How do I begin? And I was still working full-time as a lawyer when I wrote my first novel. And I decided that every Sunday I would write for just 1 hour. That's it.
Just 1 hour a week?
1 hour every Sunday. I would write one scene and 150 scenes would be a novel. And that is more or less, crudely speaking, what happened. And I produced my first novel. I had to break it down into a manageable undertaking, because it's terrifying. It's terrifying.
There's a question's come in from a listener. Dominic wants to know, can I ask these authors if they've ever written non-fiction? Can they give Dominic any advice on this aspect of writing? He's writing a history of a sports club and would be very interested in any small bits of advice.
Yes, I've written non-fiction, history of the siege of Derry and some other things. Be absolutely ruthlessly calendrical. First thing first. Calendrical. Observe
like
the calendar. Yeah. Be chronological. Don't yo-yo around in time. Don't show off. What's the first thing that happened? That's the first thing in the book. What's the second thing that happened? That's the second thing.
Yeah, you take your own personality. The author mustn't be present. Yeah, but get rid of yourself, your personality, your voice, your opinion. Get rid of it. I absolutely, Rory's advice is perfect. You tell the story in a straight line, an arrow. Let the arrow go, shoot, and just do lots of very good research. I've done lots of non-fiction. I love writing non-fiction.
And John, you've also written non-fiction, haven't you?
I haven't actually. The only non-fiction I do is I write book reviews. That's the only thing.
But it's coming.
Yeah.
And the final thing, book reviews. Is that the best bit, the worst bit, the most nerve-wracking bit?
Writers must review, in my opinion, because you keep abreast of the culture. It's a very, very good thing to do.
But is it really hard to be doing it in print about another writer and then to be on the receiving end maybe of their criticism?
You mean bad reviews? Or you just put the person's name who's given you a bad review in your little book of hate. And your turn will come. Trust me.
Well, I tell you what I don't like. I don't actually like when novelists take other novelists down. I think there's enough people out there that will do that. There's enough critics and so on. I think for the most part, if you are going to review a book, you should review a book that you have read and that you like and you want to say something positive about. I don't...
and if I'm given a book to review that I can't stand, I return it to the newspaper. I won't review it.
Yeah, because otherwise it's just... Yeah.
I think you can review something critically. I think you can say, here's all the good things and you have problems with a few bits here, but in general, it's okay. I just don't... I think writing should be more collegiate. We should support each other.
Absolutely. Life's hard enough.
Okay, well, it is what more and more and more and more and more people are doing. I mean, no matter what's happening with the internet, we are all writing, we are all reading in massive quantities these days, and not all of us with the same success that you guys have garnered, I have to add.
We must stop watching television. Then
you think that's important to you?
Yeah, then we'll have more time to read and write.
Do you not have something coming on television soon?
I do, but I'm so broad-minded, I'm telling people to turn off. Radio is different. Radio is good.
Well, radio, so you do the pictures in your head, you see, so it's an active imagination. Yeah. Anyhow, this particular active imagination has to draw to a close here, but thank you so much for joining us. MJ Hyland in Manchester, John Boyne in studio, and Carlo Gebler. I'm looking forward to both of your publications in February and April.
Yes.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.